Welcome to the podcast, Hugh.
Thank you.
How are you doing?
Fine. I'm just slightly bleary. I've had yesterday was I have another life other than the hedgehog things, and so I'm a photographer, and so but I you see you then think obviously what I am is a wildlife photographer because that would fit into this sort of thing. But no, I have developed a really weird niche, and I specialize in choirs. And choirs and concerts and orchestras and things. So yesterday I was photographing Magdalen College Choir, which I've been photographing them for about 7 years, and then went on to the Oxford Chamber Music Festival and their the brilliant performance of Beethoven's Triple Concerto. So I'm busily editing photographs at the moment, but not wildlife. You see, this is.
Do you do any wildlife photography?
I mean, a bit, but it's really simple. I've got a knackered neck and back, and I can't carry a rucksack, and there's no way I can carry the lenses required to get out into the wilds to go and do it. The stuff in my garden, the photographs which I've actually sold most effectively have been of a robin I've tamed, which comes to my so a couple of times I've tamed robins to come to my hand, and obviously when I'm out and about with hedgehogs, I'll grab pictures of them. And I'll grab pictures, but there are so many amazing wildlife photographers out there. I can't compete. I mean, there's a guy called Nick Upton who's done loads of work for my last 2 books, and you know, you see the time and care which he puts into doing it, and it's a full-time job. And so I could fart around the edges, but it's just. Yeah, there's no competition.
It's tough, isn't it? I can sympathise. I've got a knackered back, so there's some good little cameras you can get now. I've just actually switched to a mirrorless because I can't handle the big lenses anymore, and that's helping. So there's always a way.
It's all on Fuji now, so yeah. I have gorgeous kit, and as long as it can fit into a bum bag, I'm okay.
Yeah.
So that's
Good rule of life, isn't it? So what we're obviously going to waffle about hedgehogs today, so we should probably start at the beginning. So what fascinates you so much about them? Why hedgehogs?
Well, hedgehogs, it's an accident. It's not a deliberate thing. I didn't decide at some point in the distant past that I'm now going to dedicate my life to hedgehogs. But I was doing my degree at Leicester Polytechnic way back in the dark ages. I have to explain when I'm lecturing students now. When I was at Leicester Polytechnic, there was a computer room, and there was like 6 nerds in the entire Polytechnic who would book access to use the computer room. The rest of us didn't know one end of a computer. So it was that sort of long ago. And so I was doing my degree, and my supervisor for the sort of 3rd-year project bit, he was, I think, fed up with me. He just basically offered me the opportunity to do the honours project. There's an option of going to Orkney, a good long way away, and I just thought it sounded fascinating because most students were being offered the ideas of doing projects which they're done each year just to give the students something to do. It's the same thing, and this was brand new. This was the Bird Observatory on North Ronaldsay had noticed that there'd been, from being no hedgehogs to being suddenly loads of hedgehogs, and at the same time Arctic tern breeding success had gone from being really great to really low, and so there was this possibility that the arrival of hedgehogs was causing the problem. The hedgehogs had been imported by the postman in 1974 because
I think I've heard that.
He'd heard on the he'd heard on the TV, I think it was, that hedgehogs are really good for controlling slugs and snails in your garden, and that if you haven't got any hedgehogs, find somewhere with lots of hedgehogs and pop some in your garden. So obviously that was probably not meant to be a sort of start of rampant exportation of hedgehogs to islands without hedgehogs. But yes, he did that, went to visit his aunt in Aberdeen, and came back with a couple of hedgehogs, and off they went. And so that was the beginning of it, and it was properly fascinating, and it's really opened my eyes to the idea of ecology. See, studying, just looking at animals is wonderful. I've always loved doing that, but what really has been my fascination is looking at the interaction between animals and environment, the ecosystem, and so that bit of it. So how was it that these hedgehogs were having this sort of impact? Were they really having that sort of impact? And I mean, I went back in the early 90s to repeat the work, and I kept looking at what other things had changed, and masses of things changed alongside the hedgehogs arriving on the island. Farming practices had changed. The beginning of the warming of the oceans had changed, and probably the krill that the sand eels were eating was a little bit further off the krill. I mean, plankton of some sort, whatever the small little beasties in the sea. The sand eels were eating was moving a little bit further away to cooler water, and therefore the Arctic terns were flying further to get the food. Therefore, the Arctic terns were spending longer away from the nest, which meant they were more open to predation from Arctic skuas. And the Arctic skuas were getting less sand eels because all they were doing was mobbing the Arctic terns when they came back in, the kleptoparasitism being very effective up there. And so the Arctic skuas were then taking, so all of these things, everything had changed, and hedgehogs were definitely part of it, and in fact people were part of it. And so this started it. And then I was doing bits and pieces. I went down to Dungeness to look for hedgehogs because Pat Morris, the wonderful Pat Morris, who's sort of the godfather of the British hedgehog.
I've met Pat before, yeah.
So he had sort of said he'd found a paper which suggested in the 1950s that black-headed gull nests were being depredated by hedgehogs. So down on Dungeness, so he suggested I go and have a snoop around Dungeness. I didn't get to see any hedgehogs, but I got to meet Derek Jarman, which actually goes down as a big tick, and had a fantastic adventure down there. Then I ended up radio tracking hedgehogs, and that's where things sort of changed, because I was radio tracking hedgehogs and then had a moment nose to nose on a Devon lane with Nigel, who was a hedgehog. And I mean, when you're alone and radio tracking species, you'll often name your animals if you're sensible. I mean, there are those very, very straight-laced and rather boring ecologists who just rely on code numbers, but no, these animals deserve a name. And so me and Nigel, nose to nose, and I just had a moment of inspiration. It was when we were kind of nose to nose on the lane and we made eye contact and he noticed me, didn't sort of exactly say hi, but there was a moment of connection in that he was looking at me. That was different. Yeah, it wasn't just me looking at him, he was looking at me. He decided I smelt enough like a hedgehog. I was living in a caravan without any washing facilities for a month or so, and decided just to toddle off on his own. And it was just a moment then, and I suddenly thought, no, there's something special with this.
Yeah,
you can get nose to nose with an animal, and everything can change.
They're definitely one of those creatures that captures the British public's imaginations, and whether it's like is it Tiggy Winkle, well, Twiggy Winkle, whatever the kind of famous hedgehog or whatever it's called.
Mrs. Tiggy, what? Mrs. Tiggy Winkle? Sorry, yeah, come on. I mean, this is like the Beatrix Potter. This is where the hedgehog changed. And Beatrix Potter, she transformed the lives of hedgehogs at the beginning of the 20th century. Up until that moment, and I have got stacks and stacks of hedgehog books, children's books about hedgehogs. Up until Mrs. Tiggy Winkle, most stories about hedgehogs had the hedgehog as an animal of portent or doom. It was something which you were kind of suspicious about. It was a nocturnal, secretive animal. It was covered in prickles. It disappeared for half the year. Mrs. Tiggy Winkle transformed that. So from then, nearly every single story you'll find, in fact, I think every story I found, has the hedgehog as a creature of at the very least, they're benign. But normally they are just extremely jolly, happy, and engaging.
Yeah, that just shows me being an uncultured heathen that I am, really, barely picking things up. So what's your favourite facts about hedgehogs that people might not know then? Is there something that you found out through all your research and studies and you're like, actually, that's bloody amazing, but people might not know?
Well, that would have been really nice to get forewarning of a question about that. Okay, so the taxonomists, in their great wisdom, have shifted hedgehogs from insectivora to Eulipotyphlan, or Eulipotyphla. And Eulipotyphla, which I couldn't even pronounce the first sort of couple of days I was trying to work it out. Also, you write a book, a hedgehog's insectivora, and then suddenly next time you write a book or you're updating it, it's just, anyway, bloody taxonomists. So they are Eulipotyphlans, and Eulipotyphlan means truly fat and blind.
Right.
And it's nothing to do with their appearance. It's to do with their cecum, their guts. And
Okay.
so yeah, taxonomists like to go for detail.
Yeah, of course
Yeah,
they do.
that's not one you'll know.
No.
Um,
No, definitely. And many people will know that hedgehogs are in decline, and I'm sure there's a cocktail of reasons, but why are our hedgehogs in decline then?
well, us basically.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
I mean that's the cocktail.
Yeah.
Humanity, that wonderful cocktail. So it's if you look at the decline of hedgehogs, and it's really difficult doing this right now. I should have said, let's wait for like a month or so, because I work with the British Hedgehog Preservation Society, and also we work with the People's Trust for Endangered Species. And together we run a campaign called Hedgehog Street. And each 3 years, roughly, we produce the State of Britain's Hedgehogs report. And the next one is due out, I think, we should be ready by the beginning of November. So I don't know the later.
This might be out then, actually, because it won't be out for a few weeks, so it might coincide
No, I don't know
nicely.
the answer. I don't know the answer. That's the trouble.
Oh,
So, so this is the thing. I think they deliberately keep the. Data away from me in case I go on air and start speaking inappropriately and giving the answers to this thing, which is going to be press released when it comes out. So sorry, my wife has just brought me water because I suddenly forgot that. That was really helpful. So what I'm going to tell you now is based on the data up until 2018. And that 2018 report showed a 30% decline in hedgehogs from the year 2000 to 2018 in urban areas, and a 50% decline in rural areas. The urban population had declined, had leveled off from the 2015 report, which is quite exciting. And actually, that's where we have invested pretty much all of our efforts at trying to get changes made. Rural populations are still in freefall. I do not know what the next lot of data are going to show. I mean, it's sort of really, really exciting. I'm more excited by this scientific report than certainly I am was about the sort of emergence of a James Bond movie. You know, that is right up there, and I'm really keen to see a James Bond movie. But you know, this hedgehog data, it's like it'll change my world, or not. We'll see. So the population decline is real. Mammal Society did a review a few years ago, and they estimated a sort of 66% decline since the mid-1990s, which sort of fits into what we think. We don't have numbers. We don't say there's X number of hedgehogs and now there's Y, because they're actually quite difficult to count. But what we have is a number of citizen science surveys, which People's Trust for Endangered Species and the BTO run, which give us data over a long period of time. And that's meant that we can look at things and see how it changes. Hedgehogs, as cute as they are, haven't got any clever at crossing roads. And so when you have roads with the similar amounts of traffic as they do, and you can account for increased number of cars, you will get the same proportion of hedgehogs in the population being killed on those roads, which means when you've got no hedgehogs being killed at all, it probably means on a certain set of roads that there are no hedgehogs there at all.
So it's actually a good thing to see the odd squashed one then, as bad as that sounds.
It's terrible, but yes. Yeah. I mean, I get quite excited by squashed hedgehogs. In fact, I've mentioned this before, and not that long ago, actually, I got home from being out with the dog, and as it came up the sort of the drive area, I'd noticed a bad smell, and I was thinking the drains had kicked off something wrong. And so I was going inside, thinking, oh God, I've got to sort something out. And I noticed a little piece of paper stuck through the door. And it was a note from an elderly friend of mine who lives on the same housing estate. And she had written a nice little note saying, "Dear Hugh, I found this and I thought you'd be interested. I've left it in the drive." And so I went outside, and she had found roadkill hedgehog.
Lovely. Okay.
But this wasn't just like your freshly killed roadkill hedgehog. Ooh, we could bury that. There may be a skull attached to it, which we could find later. That'd be good. No. This was roadkill hedgehog that was still, well, I say still moving, was now reanimated by the great mass of maggots inside the shopping bag in which it was kept on my drive. And it was it was just the most horrendous stench. This dear friend, had scooped up this hideous decaying mass of hedgehog into a plastic bag, carried it around the estate and left it for me. And you know, if it had been somebody who didn't like me, I would have taken it as a direct assault. But no, this was meant caringly and lovingly. So yeah, I am interested in dead hedgehogs, but really not individually and in person. Theoretically, really fascinated.
Not that dead.
Not that dead, yes. So seeing a dead hedgehog means that there must be some hedgehogs around, unless, of course, that is the last hedgehog. I should add, though, in terms of population decline, I have done over the years hundreds of talks to Women's Institute groups, to Towns Women's Guild groups, to the University of the Third Age, Probus groups, gardening clubs, the works. And certainly when I started doing them, they were all much, much older than me. That I'm kind of catching up now with a lot of these groups, which is a shame. But it was a really interesting opportunity to talk about what people remembered from their childhood. And fascinating, you know, the difference in terms of the numbers of hedgehogs that people used to see. And most people, not everybody, people move around the country, they move to areas with hedgehogs, but most people, you start the conversation and they will remember times when it was a common thing to see hedgehogs in your garden at night. And now it is a rare thing, unless you're one of those lucky people who keep sending me pictures and just making me more and more jealous about the hedgehogs they see. I think it's not unreasonable, and this is a guess based on anecdotal evidence. It's not as robust as the work we've been doing with Hedgehog Street. I would guess that we've lost between 90 and 95% of the hedgehogs in the United Kingdom since the end of the Second World War.
Wow, that's quite a worrying amount.
So properly big population declines, which is, therefore it's worth paying attention to. I mean, they're now shifted across to being vulnerable on the red list. And so, we recognize the substantive problem. Unfortunately, as you're probably well aware, the quinquennial review of wildlife legislation is ongoing at the moment. And there's this massive effort being put ahead by government. We're going to build back better because we've got bozo Boris going in there with his bulldozer and his high vis jacket, caring not a fig for what he squashes. And that is really where it's going with this, and trying to remove, whilst we're trying to argue to get the hedgehog increased protection under the Wildlife and Countryside Act, we now find that actually this review is looking at removing a whole bunch of protection to a whole host of other mammals. And so, yes, I become moderately grumpy about that.
Well, I think a lot of ecologists haven't they? With visit, great crested newts would be stripped and bats would be stripped and pretty much anything. I think the only thing left was a frog. And that's about it. Bullfrog is the only thing that would be left for protection, and there's only one site in Norfolk with them. So apart from that, everything would be stripped. So yeah.
Yeah, no, so it is kind of absurd. And at the same time, I'm campaigning in my own way to get extra protection for hedgehogs and managing, bizarrely, to get some footing on it. And it's sort of there is a will out there, and from developers as well as from members of the public, to actually do good things for hedgehogs. But it's the absurdity of a government hell bent on destruction is just sickening.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And it's perhaps no surprise then that people obviously want to help hedgehogs, and a lot of people feed them and they have these houses. So I just wanted to kind of check with you, because you read on, maybe online's the worst place to check, because one website will say one thing, another website will say another thing. So what should you feed them? I'll start with, because I've seen everything from dedicated hedgehog food to mealworms to you only can give them dry food, you can only give them wet food. So Hugh, what do we feed hedgehogs?
So what you feed hedgehogs is the wild animals that you've got in your garden because you've made your garden wildlife friendly. That's what you put. Supplementary food, well, by all means do. There are a lot of people who speak extremely authoritatively about what is right for hedgehogs. And a lot of people who have very little evidence, proper empirical evidence as to what is good and what is not good for hedgehogs. A lot of people make very bold statements about what is right and what is wrong. And then, and this is the delight of your research tool of the internet, spend every spare minute of their time, and a lot of them have a lot of time, shouting at people who possibly have used the wrong colored bowl because it might just upset the hedgehog. You know, there is such a degree of instant outrage at any seeming transgression of a bunch of ever-changing rules made by a bunch of people who cannot actually agree amongst themselves as to what is the right way forward, as to make this thing absurd and ridiculous. And it does put people off. It puts people off a great deal. There's a bunch of so some of the hedgehog rescuers out there are absolutely stunning, and there are some who are just hell-bent on generating outrage and generating attention, because then they use that as a fundraising device. And so I've been caught up with this. There's some absolute Fruit Loops out there who've been shouting at me because I had the temerity to point out that hedgehogs eat slugs.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so we know hedgehogs eat slugs because they do. We know that hedgehogs eat slugs because they've evolved parasites which circulate between the hedgehog and the slug. That's happened over a very long period of time, so we know they do. Slugs may not be the principal choice of food for a hedgehog when given a plate of gorgeous pedigree chum or whatever it might be, or kitten biscuits because it must be soft or hard, or a slug. They will go for the nice easy stuff rather than the slime coated stuff. But now I've had people shouting at me, and just because I suggested hedgehogs eat slugs. And again, but this, obviously I've seen healthy hedgehogs out there eating slugs. It's because well-meaning people have added 2 and 2 together and made 73. And it's slugs can carry, some species of slugs can carry a parasite which can give hedgehogs lungworm.
Yes, yeah.
So we know that's a fact. There are certain species of lungworm which are hedgehog specific, and they go through this cycle. So therefore they've evolved together, therefore they've been eating slugs for a very long time. So therefore the extrapolation from that is, if at any point you tell members of the public that hedgehogs eat slugs, they will therefore not feed hedgehogs if they've got slugs in their garden, and that they will, collect slugs up and force feed hedgehog slugs or whatever. I mean, it's nonsense. It's so yes, hedgehogs can get lungworm, and they will get that from eating slugs. But to argue with absolute zero evidence that hedgehogs don't eat slugs, unless of course they're starving and on the brink of death already, is complete nonsense. So this is why the whole area is a bit frustrating. So in terms of what should hedgehogs eat, well, hedgehogs are carnivores. Hedgehogs will eat meat. They'll eat a whole bunch of stuff. They will tend to eat what's in front of them unless they really don't like it, unless there's been a sudden sort of, we've had kitten biscuits. I've had complaints, people putting out new model Tesco's kitten biscuits, and the hedgehogs don't like the new version, but they like the old version. And it's just like, oh, for God's sake, focus on making your garden a rich place for wildlife, full of caterpillars and earwigs and worms and all sorts of invertebrates. Please do that. And then really, if you must, put out a little bit of food for hedgehogs too. It's it just would be lovely to have an entire housing estate dedicated to wildlife, and then you wouldn't need to put out any supplementary food. But yeah, obviously there isn't an entire estate like that, so people do.
The reality is as well, you're probably just feeding the local cats.
Well, not if you're clever.
Okay.
So you can develop a hedgehog feeding station which actually will mitigate against most cats. I mean, some are really crafty. But hedgehog, you can look online for hedgehog feeding stations. There are quite a bunch of clever designs out there. But an upturned box which stops birds getting at it first thing in the morning, and if you put a sort of partition into the box so that a paw can't be reached into the box to pull the food out, little 13-centimeter hole for the hedgehogs to do that. And if you put if you sort of have a hole in the bottom, the corner of the box, and you kind of make a tunnel going in and coming round, that also means that if a rat comes in, the rat would then find itself in a corner to eat. And actually, in a new situation, rats will tend not to linger too long in a corner. They will. It's just they would prefer not to be trapped. So they will. It doesn't stop rats eating it, but it reduces it. You put a brick on top, stop foxes knocking it over, and you can not rely on it just being hedgehogs, but then borrow your neighbour's trail camera and see who is coming to eat it.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, it's there is a value to it, but it's just the absurdity of the outrage.
Yeah. So really, the best thing is make sure that your garden is as wildlife friendly, which is going to encourage lots of natural food and maybe a bit of supplementary food, but don't do it for them to rely on, basically.
Yeah, I mean, the hedgehogs won't rely, because the hedgehogs, people tell me about their hedgehog.
Yeah.
And then they discover that their hedgehog is 9 different hedgehogs. It's they are entirely promiscuous.
Yeah.
I mean, some hedgehogs will build up a routine and will keep coming back, but they aren't just relying on any one garden. They can't. I mean, if you look at how far hedgehogs move, on average, male hedgehogs will move 2 kilometers a night, and they'll shift between 20 different gardens. So you may love your hedgehog and it may come at 8 o'clock every night, but it may be 7 different hedgehogs, or it may just be going off and visiting a whole bunch of other gardens too.
Right. Okay. There are going to be lots of people blowing people's minds now. They think, oh, there's Hank the hedgehog, and nope, there's about 7.
It's also Henrietta the hedgehog.
Yeah. The other one, of course, is hedgehog houses, which is kind of filtered into garden centres now. And I think 10 years ago, I'd have been hard pushed to find a hedgehog house. Now they're everywhere and they're almost quite in vogue. So I wonder, are they any good, or is it just a sort of marketing thing? Is a hedgehog house useful for hedgehogs?
Okay, so I have a degree of prejudice about this. Again, it goes back to exactly the same thing I said about the food. If you've got a wildlife-friendly garden, you don't need a hedgehog house. Okay, you've got a compost heap, you've got a leaf pile, you've got a log pile, you've left some brambles, all of these things. What a hedgehog needs is a structure into which to bring vegetation, and then they roll around in vegetation. The spines comb the leaves into a nice layered shape. They create their gorgeous hibernaculum. But actually, if you've got a fairly neat garden, if for whatever reason you're having a conflict with the person you share a house with who wants a neat garden, a hedgehog house is a very good thing. If you're in rented accommodation and you have got to maintain your garden a certain way, a hedgehog house is a very good idea. If you just want to increase the number of options the hedgehogs have got, hedgehog house is a good idea. But do they work? And so a few years ago, the Hedgehog Street campaign ran the hedgehog housing census, and I firmly predicted that what the hedgehog housing census would show is that people go out and buy hedgehog houses because they're driven by the overwhelming guilt at their participation in the destruction of our ecosystem and their participation in this industrialized capitalism, which is destroying life on Earth. And so to assuage that guilt, they'll buy a hedgehog house. And then the hedgehogs are just going to go, yeah, I'm not interested in that, and snuffle off into the bushes. I was wrong. The hedgehog houses were used considerably. So the surveys that people did, rather fascinatingly, however, homemade hedgehog houses were used more often than shop-bought hedgehog houses.
Oh, okay.
And I have a theory about that, which I think bears up, in that you will buy a hedgehog house for your uncle because they once expressed an interest in hedgehogs and you just don't know what to get them for Christmas. So you get them a hedgehog house and they stick a hedgehog house in the garden, and so be it. However, you are there with your kids and you drag them out of bed and because you've seen a hedgehog in the garden and you show them the hedgehog, and so they're going, we must help the hedgehog. What can we do? We'll build a hedgehog house. So you have a little family project. You build a hedgehog house. You stick it in the garden because you've seen a hedgehog. So therefore, that's my reasoning behind that. Is that people will build one as a sort of reaction to actually having seen a hedgehog. But no, remarkably, they worked. We imagined it was better to have them not facing north just because cold winds blow, but it didn't seem to make a difference. It certainly is best if they're against an edge, and it seems best if they're against an edge and under some sort of bush or vegetation. But it didn't seem to make a lot of difference how close they were to the house. Didn't make a difference if you had dogs or foxes visiting the garden either. So it's on the Hedgehog Street site. There's the report of the Hedgehog Housing Census. Yes, there is a lot of effort put into trying to persuade people who care about something to part money to be seen to care more about it. Yes.
So basically, it's not going to hurt. It's the short and curlies of it. Like,
So food isn't going to hurt. A hedgehog house isn't going to hurt. No. The thing which will hurt is if you don't put out water.
Okay.
So shallow. I mean, obviously, I say that, and it's just started pouring with rain. But so during the summer, shallow dishes of water absolutely crucial. And obviously, instinctively that hedgehogs need to drink because all wildlife needs this. access to water. But I was absolutely fascinated by watching, because I get sent an awful lot of videos of various bits of hedgehog behavior. And in this one, it was a bit of video of a hedgehog coming up to a water bowl. And normally it's 10-second clips on your trail camera. This was a security camera. The hedgehog drank for over 2 minutes.
Wow.
And it was like, yeah, they do need water. So that's a really, really crucial thing. If you're going to think of anything to do, if you're worried about upsetting the outrage triggers, put out water. I mean, yeah, just put out water.
Can't deny everything needs water, doesn't it? And you mentioned it at the beginning. I'm glad you did, so we can bring it back up now. Is hedgehogs finding their way to places they shouldn't? Because one of the sadly ironic things is that they're, dare I say, invasives in some parts of the world, but even in the UK. I know I went to Col recently in the Hebrides, and there were hedgehogs there, and I don't think they're meant to be there either. So it is weird that they've kind of ended up in other parts of the world, and potential problem.
I mean, Col, I don't know about Col actually. It's so after I did the North Ronaldsay work on hedgehogs in the mid 80s and then back in 91. I then in 2003, if you remember back, there was the launch of the cull of hedgehogs in the Uists in the Outer Hebrides. And so the hedgehogs there had been introduced into South Uist and had gradually sort of spread up through South Uist, Benbecula, and were touching on North Uist. And there was it's an entire chapter of a book's worth of material there, so I won't go into it now. I do a full lecture on this, but it's the hedgehogs' arrival was definitely correlated with a decrease in the breeding success of ground nesting birds. And if you know the Outer Hebrides, or the Uists in particular, this is where you've got the Machar, this amazing sandy, biodiverse, rich lowland area, and vast numbers of wading birds just nest along there, internationally important populations of wading birds. And the arrival of the hedgehog definitely correlated with a decline in their success. And so over the years, a number of studies have been done which showed this. And then they started killing the hedgehogs. I went up there to report on it, actually, because I presumed that it was the RSPB were killing the hedgehogs along with the SNH, who, well, Nat Scott now, but and the Scottish government. And I assumed it was being done because there'd been no alternative found. When I got there, I actually discovered that a bunch of numpties were involved with making the decision to kill the hedgehogs, and I got very agitated and it got involved with campaigning to stop them being killed. You can move them off the island, it's fine. Somebody had written a report arguing that that the only humane way to deal with the hedgehogs was to kill them. Interestingly, the guy happened to run the Humane Slaughter Association. I just think maybe
conflict of interest, perhaps.
Yeah, well, just so I got involved with the campaign to stop it. I ended up doing the research which showed you can translocate hedgehogs and it's fine. And we got them to stop killing the hedgehogs. But they did then move to change the law. So it's now illegal to release hedgehogs on islands which don't have hedgehogs, which is common bloody sense.
Yes, yeah.
And it's, so yes, I mean, I love hedgehogs dearly, but if they are then going to cause localized or regional important extinctions, then we've got to remove them.
So are they gone from Uist now?
Well, you've got a funny sense of humor. Oh no, of course not.
No, okay.
No, it's rather unfortunate. You see, back in 2003, they started killing them, and there's a bunch of people rescuing them as well, and removing them from the islands. There was a bit of a little hullabaloo, and by 2007, they'd stopped killing them, and everybody was rescuing hedgehogs, moving them off the island. And right at the beginning, we had us a lot of bunny huggers, which included a bunch of proper academics, I should say, had suggested, why don't you use fencing? Oh, don't be ridiculous, you can't use fencing. Anyway, I think they're now beginning to look at the idea of fencing. But it was I think North Uist is pretty much clear. And then, so basically, because that's where there were least hedgehogs, and then move down, clear Benbecula, and then start on South Uist. And I mean, that's the way that they're approaching it. But unfortunately, due to a whole bunch of problems, loss of funding, Brexit, COVID, everything else, there are probably as many hedgehogs on the Uists now as there were when this started.
Wow. So it's kind of just bounced straight back up then.
Well, I mean, that's over 10 years or so. It's just if you don't actually get rid of the hedgehogs, they're going to keep breeding.
Yeah, they're going to do what they're going to do, aren't they? Because is it New Zealand and Australia? I think we've plonked them there. New Zealand, is it? Yes, we've plunked them there as well. So they've kind of followed us. Well, they didn't have much choice, really.
No, the hedgehogs in New Zealand were very specifically asked for. So the colonists arrived in New Zealand, and they looked around the place going, "This is really gorgeous," but you know what? We're missing something, and so they wrote back to the UK and said, "Could you send some hedgehogs, please?" And because they were lonely, and they sent hedgehogs. And for a long time, they were considered to be the most benign of all of these animals that were exported out there. But now it's being recognised they are totally linked in with the killing of both invertebrates and vertebrates. So some of the skinks being really hammered by it, and also obviously all the birds nest on the ground, and not all nest on the ground, but they all flightless birds. And you've got a whole bunch of eggs at their disposal as well. So.
Yeah, not so. It kind of muddles the thoughts of Miss Tiggywinkle then when they're murdering all these endangered animals abroad.
Well, I mean, that's the delightful thing is if ecology was simple, they'd probably let astrophysicists do it.
Yeah.
But I mean, actually, ecology is really tough, and you need a particular sort of metal to be doing this. Out there freezing your nuts off, in the mud and the rain, living in a caravan with a standpipe in the field for washing. Yeah. You don't get that if you're doing astrophysics.
And I'd hate to just mention hedgehogs because you're not a one-trick pony. So we are going to talk about something else as well, which is you've got a book coming out soon on beavers, haven't you?
I do. I most certainly. I mean, in fact, I can do the subtle reveal.
Go on, then.
I know this is largely going to be audio, but for the listeners at home, I'm now holding up a delightful thing called the Beaver Book.
What's it about?
Well, this one is all about water voles. No, this one, interesting. So I say that. So last year, so Graph Egg, this wonderful publishers, they asked me to do the Hedgehog book, which is interestingly about hedgehogs. And there was a cock up at the printers, and a bunch of them went out with a recipe book inside with a hedgehog cover, but not hedgehog recipes, but just a normal recipe. Yeah, that would be really tasteless. So no, the Beaver Book is fun. I mean, I mean, nobody's going to be listening, and so it's okay. But just don't tell the hedgehogs. I love all wildlife, really. I really, really do. I mean, I've been off doing exotic safaris in exotic places and seen all that stuff. That's fantastic. I've had actually the best wildlife moments of my life in my garden with a robin that I tamed to feed from my hand. I love wildlife. I love nature, but the hedgehogs are a really effective way of talking about really big, complex ecological issues. It is sort of quite easy to put people off. You sort of stride into a room and start talking about the transport infrastructure, habitat fragmentation, the way we grow our food, climate change, etc. But if you walk into a room and chat about hedgehogs, then people will listen. And then obviously you can talk about all of those things as well. And again, I mean, the beaver is as fascinating a creature. I mean, the thing about the hedgehog is nobody really has a problem with hedgehogs. Every time there's a vote or a poll, the hedgehog wins the nation's favorite nature icon and favorite animal, favorite mammal. But the beaver does wind up some people, mainly people who simply don't know the reality of a beaver. I mean, the reality is that if you have beavers in a waterway, there are more fish. They don't eat fish, please. They don't eat fish. And C.S. bloody Lewis, I mean, what did he go and do that for? I mean, just having a fish-eating bloody beaver in the wardrobe thing. It was just no. So they're herbivores, and so they create an ecosystem. They create a more varied ecosystem. They create this patchwork landscape. They create a messy landscape, which is just the best thing, and that allows a whole host of other wildlife to be able to flourish too. And so, no, the beaver I'm a big fan of the beaver, and it also means that my stand-up routine has now just suddenly got a whole bunch more material.
Innuendo bingo.
So I've just been sent the link to the reading of the apparently children's book, Brenda's Beaver Needs a Barber. And I recommend it's not quite, yeah, it's suitable for work actually, because it's
Okay.
just innuendo. But yeah, Brenda's Beaver Needs a Barber. There's this American woman reading it. She's in isolation. She's been doing the whole COVID isolation thing, and she just reads this book, and her laugh is, it's 5 minutes of your life you will not regret spending on YouTube. So obviously there's a lot of silliness around it, but the main thing is, as a rewilding tool, as an ecosystem engineer, as a way of actually creating an enormous amount of change, there is really little that can compare with the beaver. And it's, since I've finished the book, I mean, every week there's new stories. It was Derbyshire last week.
Yeah, it's not far from where I live.
And it was just like, could you just give me a chance to at least get the book out? I mean, it just sort of feel that I sort of wrote all the projects up to date by the time I got finished the book in June, and it's just suddenly more and more and more happening, and I think that's wonderful. I mean, I was lucky to go up to Ailith up in where is it? Scotland. It was the Banff estate. Now they'd introduced beavers there into an enclosed area, and I got to see the beavers and the transformation to this once agricultural estate. Absolutely stunning, and that was many years ago. And then last couple of summers I've been down with the wonderful Derek Gow down on his Coombs Head rewilding project down north of Dartmoor, and that place is absolutely stunning. I mean, if you have the opportunity to take a break ever, and you want to, these shepherd's huts, gorgeous shepherd's huts, and you sort of wake up in the morning and you look out and you've got a wild boar, a buffalo, goodness knows what going on out there. Take a little walk around the corner. You've got wild cats. You've got beavers. When I was camping there this summer, Derek had just said, "Oh, pitch your tent where you were last time," and put my head out the corner of it in the morning and look around the corner and find we'd camped right next to the links. Yeah, it's like, this place is awesome. So it's kind of the future. We managed to destroy so much and clear so much off, and then piece by piece by piece, little bits are being replaced. Whether it's the red kites or the beavers, things are coming back. And in moments of extreme frustration and upset and misery about the state of the world, you look at these little moments and you go, however hard that priapic marshmallow tries to destroy our countryside, Boris is not going to get rid of the red kites. He's not going to get rid of the beavers. These things are here to stay. And if we carry on fighting the corner for good ecological, scientifically based conservation, we can make big transformations.
So you're hopeful for their return then, in terms, and I'm not on about like just these big gated community of beavers. I mean, Gate's gone out to do their own thing. You're hopeful that we'll get them back at some point.
Well, they're already out there.
Yeah, no, I know there's some in the River Otter, and I know there's some in Scotland on the Tay, the official ones, and I'm sure there are other unofficial
there
ones.
There are an awful lot of unofficial beavers out there. I mean, I think one turned up on the outskirts of Bristol recently. So there's, and it's there, and they've been seen down in Cornwall. They have, that whatever it is, it's bolted now. They're gone. They're out there. And I think now we just need to work on education. We need to work on communication, because there are still people who are frightened of the idea of having beavers destroying all their fish. Herbivores, and still people worried about what they're going to cause flooding, but they don't. They actually stop flooding. They slow the transition of water from high uplands down to the lowlands. They actually, and having that slow transit of water means, I mean, already there is evidence to show that they've reduced flooding in parts of the UK where they've been released. We do need a sensible conversation about how we manage beaver populations when they do cause problems, and if they do invade, I mean, that's totally the wrong use of the word, sorry, when they move into areas which are good agricultural land, we need to find a way around it. But actually, you know what, they got, whilst they're a different genus, the beavers in America, they've got extremely well worked out ways of dealing with beavers. Ben Goldfarb wrote a brilliant book about beavers for the American experience. And actually, they got beavers all across continental Europe. They've had them there for a lot longer, in abundance than we have, and they've worked out ways of coexistence. These things can be done if we can have a non-outrage, non-shrill argument, discussion rather, about these things. We just sit down and go, okay, what are the facts? What can we do to stop things happening which are going to upset people, and how do we ensure that people understand the true value of their presence in the ecosystem?
No, I think you're right. I mean, I'm because I'm quite involved with fish, do a lot of work with fish, so it's interesting to hear that. And yeah, I get it a lot from angling sides who are not overly keen on beavers, and it's just trying to put all the points across and the facts across about them, like you say. But yes, they're not. They're more likely to munch on a carrot than they are on a carp. So I think we'll be fine in that
The
sense.
Beaver Trust, for example. I mean, Eva Bishop from the Beaver Trust wrote a chunk of a chapter in my new Beaver book, and what she points out is that opposition does tend to melt away when you explain what they do. And the opposition is based simply on a lack of knowledge, and that's just a lack of knowledge because we've not been living with beavers for a very long time. I mean, we used to kill beavers because for their castoreum, for the secretions of their anal glands, which were considered to be a cure-all. I mean, and it's utter bollocks. And in fact, they're not bollocks because they thought they were.
Is it vanilla? Is it vanilla or something?
Yeah, vanilla used to come from it as well. It's like, oh, for goodness sake. So we don't, I mean, that was actually a positive thing, but really it got to the point that anesthetizing and squeezing the private parts of beavers became quite an expensive way of producing something that you could just make with the output of the petrochemical industry or a bunch of plants. So lots of different uses that the beavers' bits were put to. Which are all nonsense, and we have, I think, grown out of beaver fur, which is, it had the most stunning fur. I mean, it was to feel, to stroke. I mean, I've stroking a beaver coat or a stuffed beaver. It is just an extraordinarily amazing coat, and it is quite possible actually. The only reason any beavers left in Europe is because of the discovery of the North American beaver colonies populations, because it was becoming very expensive to kill the beavers in Europe because there were so few. And so then they just go, it's much cheaper just to go across the ocean and slaughter millions of beavers.
Well, there's plenty of them there, yeah. Well, look, before we go, if people want to get hold of your books, where's the best place to go?
Well, your local bookshop, actually. I mean, I've got I've got a whole bunch of stuff I've written. I've written a book called Linescapes, which is sort of sitting behind me, all about habitat fragmentation, which is, I think, a really important subject for all people interested in ecology. The fact that we've created a bunch of linear features in our landscape, which hedges, ditches, dikes, roads, railways, canals. Each of these lines acts either as an agent of connectivity or an agent of fragmentation for wildlife, and it's not as simple as it may seem. And we can manage these linear features much better for nature. So that was an important book. I wrote a book called The Prickly Affair, which remains the only book in print to have endorsements on the cover from both Jeanette Winterson, amazing writer, Jeanette Winterson, and Anne Widdecombe. In fact, I think it's the only thing those two have ever agreed upon.
Yeah, that's an eclectic pair.
Yes, I wrote a book called The Beauty and the Beast, which I went and met 15 people a bit like me. And that is, I can't tell my wife quite how much fun I had. I had so much fun, but I had to pretend it was really hard work. Just traveling around the place, meeting really fascinating, eccentric people, and hanging out with the water vole experts and the otter experts and the robin experts and things. I had so much fun. So I enjoy writing about nature, and yes, please go find them local bookshops. If you want to log on to those large companies which don't pay their tax, I don't judge. I really can't judge because it can be cheaper, but you will support people nicely doing it locally. And if you want to get in touch with me and ask for more details about these books, at Hedgehog Hugh is my sort of social media. Is it called a handle? I'm not sure, a name.
Yeah, Twitter handle. Yeah,
that's the one. So, but on sort of Instagram and everywhere else like that. So, and if you drop me a note and send me a stamp stressed envelope, I can send you a signed book plate, because I'm just kind like that.
There you go. Well, look, Hugh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Always a pleasure to waffle about hedgehogs for 50 minutes or so. So thanks for joining me.
Absolute delight. Thanks a lot, Jack.
Cheers.